Just love time back.
Hey Brett, how's it going?
Great, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Well, today I'm joined by Brett Hovanec. He's the leader and founder of On the Fly Ops. So appreciate you coming on, Brett.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about you and tell me a little bit about On the Fly Ops.
Yeah, I started on the fly ops about 7 months ago when my I would say interviewing process kind of stalled a little bit and ended up, I guess, interviewing with other consulting firms and realized that I could do a lot of that myself. So why not give it a shot? And 7 months later, here I am at it.
That's awesome. That's a typical story, especially when I interview consultants or folks who consider themselves fractional executives. Is those first few months to get over the jitters, right? Can you build a sustainable pipeline, make sure that you don't have to go back into the W-2, right? Look for a full-time role. So
Yeah.
um, I did want to dive into two parts of the funnel with you today, and I hope you'll entertain me and indulge me on this. But one, top of funnel, and then I'd love to dive into post acquisition, right, on the right-hand side of the bow tie. But why don't we start off with top of funnel? I'm curious, what is the first few things when you think of working with a client about diagnosing their top of funnel? What are some of those critical things that you're looking for?
So I think the most critical things, I think, just from a framework perspective or foundationally, is like, what does the data integrity look like? Start there. Do they have tons of duplicates? Do they have the right fields and right criteria necessary to tell any sort of data-driven story over time? I mean, CROs are going to want to see that. Are we getting the right information? So I think that's one step. ICP clarity, like, do they know who they're reaching out to? Are they reaching out to the right people? Um, what do the signals look like to capture those, ICP people, I would say, that are out there? And then the last is really like, what does the handoff process look like from a lead management, opportunity management? What does that whole thing look like? And is it clearly defined? Is it loosely defined? And how many variations of it do you have?
I'll add one more thing, which is mapping out their process, right? I think a lot of clients
Hmm.
will tell you we have a process, we don't love it. And so that's an
Hmm.
opportunity because they already have in their mind, like the reason why they brought on some support and help in the first place is they want to potentially adjust or maybe radically transform that top of funnel. I always think about the typical SaaS model, which is lead to MQL, and then MQL to the sales team. You can call it sales qualified lead, for example. But it's
Hmm.
that first regime where you go from lead to MQL. Like, what is that for clients? Like, did they think about that very carefully around how they move from kind of a generic lead to a targeted lead that they would want to spend resources on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, I see it start as like a suspect versus the lead. So like clearly unknown versus like loosely known as a lead, I would say. MQL is really where I think a lot of clients probably get in the weeds a lot to define that, or they have other stages either before or potentially after that are very similar. And what you end up getting is, a lot of life cycle stages or a lot of lead stages that are pretty close matches to each other. And that makes it very hard to differentiate your entrance and exit criteria. And that's one of the biggest problems that I see.
That makes sense. So let's go over. I'll go over an example. So I worked on a project about 2 years ago with a software developer firm, and they had all these records come into their instance, and then they didn't have the lead volume that it was a distraction for the sales team, but that changed at some point. They had volume that was going to exceed the existing sales capacity, and so it actually made sense to start filtering these leads because the very first thing you notice is the sales team starts complaining about marketing, and is never a good dynamic when the two have a very unhealthy disposition. And so the MQL framework is essentially okay. Well, you can eyeball it. You can use the eyeball test, right? You talk to the sales team, you give them 100 leads, and you show them which ones. You just get a pen and paper and you just mark yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and you can start to pattern match why one is better than the other. And like an
Hmm.
easy example would be like personal emails, like a Gmail address or a Yahoo address. Okay, well, maybe I don't want to reach out to that because it's a B2B sale, not a B2C sale. And the fact that you showed up with a
Mhm.
Gmail is kind of like it's super sus, right? Super suspect. So that's like an
Yeah.
easy one. Another one is like student emails. You get a lot of student emails on some top of funnel forms. So I'm curious when you go through like an MQL exercise, maybe you're mapping it to the ICP, but what's a framework that you're thinking of defining that MQL for the client?
Yeah, I think clearly defining from a lead to an MQL, like those email domains make a ton of sense. A lot of the times, I think that's a very good place to start and where you can easily check those boxes off. And, just in terms of quality, I think you're going to notice pretty quickly that if it's personal email versus company email, it's going to be way more high quality if it's a company domain, right? From an MQL and even like something above it, I would say a lot of the times the key actions involved from going from a lead to an MQL is where part of the process becomes tough because like a lead could be obviously they come in through a form fill or a website visit or something, even ad clicks and stuff like that. But then what is the actual use case or action that qualifies them as marketing qualified? I mean, if they attended an event or it clicked an ad, does that count as an MQL? You know? Um, so I think it's like little things like that where, yeah, talking to the different teams helps you differentiate. A lot of the time, getting them both in the same room helps too. And also just having them define separately maybe what they think it is and then bringing it all together to kind of clearly mesh the two definitions together to something that's agreeable.
Okay.
And that definitely creates, I think, that symbiotic relationship you're talking about.
So I think you hit on the key thing, which is getting everyone in the room and then going through what I consider is a MQL mapping exercise. And the very first thing we want to do is transform the lead to MQL. And the only way you can do that is through a lead score. A lead score is super contentious because a lot of folks will say, well, you're operating with gaps in your data. Well, that's where the enrichment comes in, right? So you enrich the
Hmm.
data. Now, enrichment is going to have its flaws as well, right? Depending on your enrichment approach and the sources
Right.
that you're enriching from. But you get the lead, you have your first party data that comes off the form. Maybe you have other aggregate data that you've pulled from other folks within that company, especially in the B2B setting. Then you enrich it, then you score it. You can do a number of things on the scoring, but I always like to do an arbitrary score, which is let's map out all the factors, behavioral and demographic, and then let's put a point system, right? Let's put a point
Hmm.
system on a weighted weights and biases on these, and then we should come up with a 0 to 100 point scale, or a 100% scale, whatever is your fancy. Then what you can do is you can do a regression over in the future and say like, does this score work? Does it actually map to our conversions? Do our highest MQLs, our highest lead score MQLs, actually correlate with conversions? If not, then okay, something's really wrong with our lead score. Then you can go back and change the lead score, which is you kind of back solving for some sort of optimization. And then also, if you get to a world where you don't have enough leads, well, just lower the score, right? So
Yeah.
you can just
Yeah,
it's like
that's a
it's,
great
it's like a
point.
dam. You can just you can lower the
Yeah.
score threshold and let the water through.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, Jeff. I love that.
So okay, so we talked about lead score. How do you think about mapping lead process, right? Because we talked about stages, lead, MQL, SQL, etc. But when a lead comes in, it's assigned they're new. What are the statuses that you're typically working through with your clients?
I try to keep them pretty simple for the most part. It's are you talking from like lead, like specifically lead stages or like life cycle stages?
Well, let's tackle both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think from a lead stages or lead statuses, it would be like the newer suspect. Um, it may be attempted. It would be a connected, and then it would probably be qualified after that. And then you'd have nurture somewhere in there. You may have maybe something that's somewhat contentious in there as well as like a almost like an other status just to have. Like you maybe haven't clearly defined, but it's just something that's like a backup almost. Those would be sort of lead status, I think. And then once you move to life cycle stages, you move from lead to your MQL. Your MQL is most likely going to be when you've connected with the lead, maybe a little bit further. That's a whole nother discussion is like, when does that actually turn into an MQL stage? If you're using PQLs, or something like that, or if it's product led, that's a whole nother side too that you can dive into, of course. But yeah, I like to keep it simple. MQL, SAL, SQL, and then you're in the opportunity. Um, Once you do opportunities, I know a lot of people do like a stage zero opportunities. I like the idea of it, but I'm kind of traditional with it. You start an opportunity and that's where you begin. Typically from the meetings booked or scheduled, or completed, and that's where your opportunity is actually created.
I actually
And
really
then you
like
got customer.
I like your approach of keeping it simple, right? So it could be something as simple as, and we're just spitballing here. The lead comes in, it's new, unassigned, it's new, assigned, it's in flight, working, in progress, or whatever you want to call it. And then maybe you track separately like how many touches on it and how many days since it's been assigned. And that way you can get a timer going on when you should close that lead out. Then there are your conclusion statuses, something like this is qualified, meaning you got a hold of them. Yes, good fit,
Mhm.
set to the sales. Um, Unqualified, meaning you got a hold of them, and there's like a whole litany of reasons why they're not qualified,
Yeah.
depending on your business. Then you have nurture, which is like no one's home. You tried getting a hold of them. Um,
Hmm.
that nurture track, by the way. So when leads go into nurture, are you what kind of sequences are you seeing with the marketing? Because essentially what you're doing is it never exited. It exited the marketing funnel, went to the sales funnel, hit a dead end, and then boomeranged
Hmm.
back to marketing. What do you
Yeah.
typically recommend marketing to do with these nurture leads?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on if you're doing tiering or lead scoring as well. Like, are they a high value leads? That might want to take a different nurture path than something that's a little bit lower level, for sure. I would definitely do different sequences there. But then you've also got like the nurture reason. So, like, were they unresponsive? Was it bad timing? I think that's like another because disqualified, in my opinion, means like it's very disqualified and they're probably not coming back, right? At this company or whatever. But a nurture could be somebody who's it's just not the right timing, and there's variations of that. So having the unqualified plus unqualified reason, I think, is very key there, and that determines your nurture path.
That makes sense. So then that's a little bit about the lead process. I'm curious how you think about attribution, right? Especially with early stage companies. If they have like an out of the box marketing automation platform, they're probably already going to be equipped with a single touch model, like a first touch or a last touch. At what
Mhm.
point does it make sense to bring in, maybe a different model, like a multi-touch attribution model? Like, and how do you approach such things?
Yeah, the multi-touch models. I'm trying to remember like a good use case for it because 99% of the time it's either first lead source or last touch, source. So I haven't really dove into those very often where it's like a multi-channel, multi-touch.
Yep.
I know
Okay.
if I feel like if it's more onboarding weighted or there's a lot of steps along the way, long sales cycle, that's probably where you're going to want to bring that in from an attribution model. But otherwise, yeah, I think you're going to be on one end or the other.
Okay, that makes sense. And then how much time do you spend with campaign execution and kind of an ROI framework around campaigns? So like when you're like, for example, someone comes to you and says, "Hey, we want to run a webinar next Tuesday," and you know that a webinar actually takes like 3 weeks of planning and prep. Like, there's just no way in heck you're going to be able to launch like a webinar next Tuesday. Do you put up like an SLA or a process or framework in place for your clients? Like, what does that look like?
No, I run clear away from those situations, I think.
Okay, that makes sense. Now there's the handoff process from marketing to sales development, right? It's sales development wants these clean cut MQLs that smell fresh. They call it,
Hmm.
they expect them to pick up on the very first call and convert to a meeting. right? That's the
Yeah.
in the ideal world. What does that
Mhm.
handoff process construction look like to you?
I mean, I think it's still pretty traditional. It's just like what other steps might be involved from step one to step two, I guess, right? So like there's calling, but now you've got some text messages going on potentially. You've got like a LinkedIn Connect. I think a lot of people do their prospecting strictly on LinkedIn now. I mean, you see a ton of companies where it's their whole product line is around LinkedIn engagement and outreach. So clearly doing well there. So I think that's a big part of it. The other ones are personalization, obviously, from email perspective, even just switching around. I mean, back in my SDR days, just switching around, like, do you email first? Do you call first? Do you call, the trick is like you call, um, and like let it ring a couple times, and then you call back immediately after and say, oh, sorry, something happened. And it's like just kind of a good icebreaker almost, right? So I think there's just different tricks there.
I think it's interesting. There are some boundaries, right, for a sales development rep, or maybe they're not. You don't call on the weekends. You don't call super late at night. You don't call it super early in the morning. You don't call them on the mobile. Maybe that was like the old rules, right?
I
Have you?
think it's the Wild West
Yeah,
again, Jeff,
I
just because
agree.
you got AI now and everything. So like you're now competing with bots to an extent. So how do you beat them, right? At their sort of their computational game almost. So, you know.
So let's get to a world where it's multimodal, right? You're on WhatsApp, you're on SMS, you're on Twitter X, you're on IG, you're
I
on
like that you
LinkedIn.
said Twitter X. That's the right order.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I still call it Twitter. Um, there's LinkedIn, obviously. Um, when I think about the older, the first gen, the pioneers of sales engagement tools, they were
Yeah.
factually and primarily email based, right? And some of these newer
Hmm.
tools are trying to be multimodal. I'm curious if you've had an opportunity to implement and use some of those like kind of newer tools that are somewhat multimodal. And I haven't had any experience recently with them, but I'm curious about the reporting that's coming out of them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, from multimodal, um, the only thing that I think, and really hasn't changed that much of like you got your Loom videos, you got all those kind of different elements that people are adding into it. You've got voicemail drops that you can do. A lot of it is sort of the same but different.
Hmm.
I've had people reach out recently with Loom videos in LinkedIn with calendar invites in the Loom video. And I think though, I've been against those for a really long time. Like I don't feel like video makes too big a difference for me because now I have to not only, log into whatever it is you communicated to me on, but now I have to like click play on a video that I'm not necessarily that interested in and then listen to the whole spiel, right? Whereas like if it's an email, I can just skim through it. If it's a text message, sure. Voicemail, whatever. It's quick. But I have found, especially lately, that a lot of these videos just feel more real. And now that we're in this world of AI, overkill, all those things that probably felt overwhelming or like a nuisance, I feel like are not anymore. It feels a lot more personal. And I don't know, just more like of an icebreaker, an easy icebreaker, where before it just seemed like overkill.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think the thing there is the environment has changed, and buyers are looking for somewhat of a comfort zone. Human to human interaction is that comfort zone. So that's super interesting. Well,
Yeah.
let's flip the page to post sales. Um, CS operations is a discipline that I think is not discussed enough, and in fact, I think it's underinvested in for a very long time at most companies, and
Mhm.
it's partially funded with a part-time allocation of your existing sales operations team deployed to customer success. So I'm curious
Yeah.
about what are some of those big cadences or big projects that typically come up for CS operations?
Yeah, a lot of it, obviously, like retention, churn, white space analysis kind of stuff, health score designs, like what do those models look like? And then onboarding, I think, is like a big post sale, like what does onboarding look like? how long should it be? Like what is the design of that is a big element, I think, where people can get lost in translation there, overthink it. Because from a process perspective, if you're trying to trigger off of things and keep it on a specific deadline, a lot of the times people want to be onboarded within an SLA of, whatever the time frame. In order to get there, how do we construct a workflow to, make sure that we're hitting all those milestones along the way, engaging the customer who is now onboarded, and then potentially, either showcasing new features or upgrades along the way, making them an even more valuable customer, either now or down the line.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think
Uh,
it starts off with successful kickoff,
mhm.
implementation, adoption, and then engagement. Was like typically if I was a customer, that's what I would expect. And the one thing I hate the most is, as a buyer, is the expectations that were set with me during the sales process are completely
Mm,
different with the expectations with the customer kickoff, right? And it's nothing that pisses me off more. It's like, wait, you told me the implementation was going to take 4 weeks, and then now you're telling me it's 8 weeks. Now
yeah.
I'm blindsided by this. So, and then secondly, yeah, so I guess let's start there, right? The expectation game between sales and CS. What type of information do you see as best in class that should be handed off between both orgs?
Well, I think you and I both, I think, posted about like Flola recently as a deal room design, which really I think helps to tell that story and transition from sales to post sales to onboarding a customer to any sort of assets that you need to share along the way, and just kind of keeping everyone on the same page, aligned. You've got your RACI basically built in there, right? So everyone's on the same page. And to your point, you don't get lost in who said one thing versus what it actually is. It's all kind of clearly communicated. The milestones are there. You can see it. All communication is in one area, and nobody's losing traction along the way. It's this smooth trajectory that everyone can see and be a part of. And I think that's really a deal breaker for complex sales and onboarding processes and teams for that matter.
So, I don't know when's the last time you bought a new computer, but when you open the box, like a Mac, and then the box is like really tight, and you have to like kind of jiggle and shake it in order for the lower half of the box to like slowly come down. Right?
Oh yeah, they're packed so tight now.
Yeah, it slowly separates, right? It's that kind of like that friction in the box. And then it opens up and then you see like the nice packaging. Like I almost wish there was like a sound, like a chime that comes on when you open the box. I want that when I buy software, right?
Yeah,
Like I want that experience. Like I signed the contract and I want the box. And I want the unboxing to be crisp. Like it should be,
yeah,
here's what was communicated to you in the sales process. Here's what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. Here's a step-by-step guide. And it's not some janky like Google Doc that you sent to me.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
It's got to be better than that. Then on your side of the fence, that you're project tracking every little element in the work breakdown structure and you're following through with status updates to me, right? That's what I want.
Mhm.
I don't want, hey, you close a contract and then 2 weeks later you somehow email me for a customer kickoff because I nudged you. Like that's just not great, right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
I'm curious about some of the successes that you've had with like implementation and success teams. Like, what's one key thing that you've built and you thought, wow, that really made a difference at this one company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one was a while back, just moving from like Zendesk to Service Cloud was a big migration and implementation, and being a part of that, I just learned so much from the process and dealing with the different functional groups along the way. But I think one of the main things I learned is just like how valuable those interactions are after the sale. And to your point, the unboxing is like part of the value or part of the sell that you want to experience at the end of like why you bought it. And that's part of why, RevOps teams and people like us love new technologies and experimenting with them is like to get that feeling that you kind of talked about. So from a CS perspective and operationally, um, I think the big ones are like I've done a couple projects where we did like churn renewal process, things like that. I mean, I think that's more on account managers than CS teams. But yeah, I mean, I wish I could dive into it a bit more and add a lot more nuance to it. But I haven't done like a ton of super interesting things there, to be honest.
Interesting. So, okay, so churn. Um, there's some churn experiences that are horrific and some that
Mhm.
are more delightful. Um, Let me think of an example. So I joined the gym called LA Fitness a couple of years ago, and in order to churn, I had to write them a letter, like a physical letter, and mail it to them.
Yep.
There's no tracking on my end. I have no idea unless I pay for the receipt at the USPS. But that was a horrible experience because they know for a fact that I'm used to using the computer and I don't write a letter and I'm not going to get it out the door. It took me like
Yeah.
4 months of paying for a membership that I wasn't using to cancel. That was like a horrible experience. A good experience is like when I churn off of like HBO Max and it says, "Hey, are you sure you want to churn? We'll lower your
We'll give you a
monthly to
discount. Yeah.
they will give you a discount for 3 months, and then after 3 months, you go right back up to 15.99 or whatever they're charging me. That's actually a
Yeah.
pretty good experience because it's a non-zero chance that I'm gonna click. Okay, well maybe I'll keep it on for the lower price. Um,
Right.
yeah. So what does that churn process look like, or what's a churn process that you've seen that you designed that you thought, wow, this is pretty good.
I mean, I think it's something similar to that, like offering either incentives or I would say a walkthrough specifically from an account manager or somebody who can really provide more of a story behind it or maybe show a use case, especially if it's like an enterprise grade software solution. They should be able to, if somebody's going to churn from that, ideally they're going to be providing something up front, whether maybe it's additional features that they're throwing in, um, things like that. But a lot of the times what I've noticed is if somebody wants to churn, most of the time now, I would say, and especially if it's quickly, right? Um, First 90 days is key. I think if you can get past that, you're in the clear for quite some time. But if somebody, I would say, onboards with your product and they're not seeing full value within first 30 days
Mm.
and then fully experiencing it and having that full life cycle experience in the next 60 days, depending on the software solution or whatever, then you're really going to be in trouble. And a lot of the times, like the trials that we see, maybe it's a free trial kind of thing, but it's only giving you the minimum features. So if you stay on for it, you never actually experience what the full product offer is. And that's a big issue too. So like anyone who does trials, they should automatically be enterprise grade. They should be top of the line. Trials, let them experience the full product, give them time to experiment and test it out. And then if they want to churn out of a trial and they don't sign up, or even if they downgrade to something else, they realize how much they lost, makes them either go back to that full feature list that they had, um, or, over time, I think they start to remember the value they saw up front, and then they end up upgrading or upselling fairly quickly down the line. And it kind of goes the same for, like you said, churn. If somebody's going to leave, part of it I think is we see this so often now, Jeff, with everything is like, oh, I'm going to leave it, but now they're going to give you 20% off or 2 months free or something like that. Where it's like, oh, well, if I do this now, then I can kind of create a sequence out of this or whatever, right? Or cadence, and every 3 months I'm going to churn, and they'll give me a better deal. So then you get into that sort of life cycle, and that's where people get in trouble too.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so I always ask this for all my guests. Last question of the segment, which is, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to leave for the go-to-market community?
Piece of advice. Ooh. Well, my piece of advice, I think, would be to spend time understanding your ICP, the different life cycle stages that you either report on or your workflows are triggered on, and spend time understanding your retention and churn strategies. I think those are like probably some really big components in 2025 that people need to really focus in. I mean, AI is obviously one thing, but those are like frameworks that are going to last a long, long time and provide value well into the future.
Well, amazing. Brett, for those who want to connect with you and learn more about on the fly ops, where can they go and do so?
You can find me at ontheflyops.com or LinkedIn Brett-Hovanec.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a good one.